Okay, class, we are now on part 4 of chapter 2, uh, our discussion of culture. This part is going to kind of cover an assortment of concepts related to culture, and then we'll move into a discussion of to what extent do we all have the same or differing cultures within one society. So let's begin with an introduction of the terms ideal culture, real culture, and cultural inconsistency. So, in the last two presentations, we've been discussing American culture in terms of its artifacts, its technology, its beliefs, its values, and its norms. And for some of those elements, particularly the symbolic cultural elements, perhaps what we were discussing could best be described as ideal culture, the values, norms, behaviors, beliefs that people in a given society profess to embrace. So the what we like to say about ourselves. So, for instance, the example I give here is the saying, beauty is only skin deep. Or the idea that, we value realness over superficiality, or beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or as my mother used to say when I was growing up, pretty is as pretty does. If you take all those beliefs and the values, it would suggest, right, that we live in a society, we live in a culture where beauty isn't that important. It's not that important of characteristic that a person would have, that there are a lot of things that are way more important than being beautiful. But this is where ideal culture runs up against real culture. So real culture refers to the values, norms, and behaviors that people in a given society actually embrace and exhibit. So instead of what we say about ourselves, this is the what we actually do, and what our cultural elements actually imply about us. And so, for instance, in regards to this beauty example, we know through research that conventional attractiveness is oftentimes linked to social, economic, and educational advantages. More attractive people are more likely to be offered higher starting wages than less attractive people. They're more likely to be promoted. More attractive little children, pre-K kindergartners, are more likely to receive positive attention and reinforcement from their teachers than children who are less conventionally attractive. And anyone who has ever dated, swiped, done anything in the world of dating apps knows that being conventionally attractive is an advantage in the dating market. So, our ideal culture might say this thing isn't really that important, but our real culture suggests that it is. And we call this cultural inconsistency when there is a contradiction between our ideal cultural goals and the practices of our real culture. When there is a contradiction between who we say we are versus who we really are. So, America, which of course was founded on the value of freedom and equality, of course, has had to acknowledge that even at the outset of this country's beginning, those values weren't meant for everyone. They were pretty much limited to white men because people of color were not seen through that same lens of being equal or deserving of freedoms. And women, of course, were not seen as being equal and deserving of freedoms. So from the very beginning, there was this kind of contradiction between our ideal culture and our real culture. And I think part of the progress, or part of the really admirable thing about America in the last four decades, certainly 4 to 5 decades, has been our for most of our dedication to progressing in such a way that that gap between ideal culture and real culture can be lessened, right? We're tackling our cultural inconsistency. So then now moving to another set of terms, related to culture. And admittedly, these terms don't quite build on one another as nicely as the previous presentation. So, this presentation has a lot of discombobulated ideas. But this next set of cultural terms relates to the types of culture and types of media. So, one way we can describe culture is high culture. So, the high culture would be like the music, the literature, the artifacts that are held in high esteem in society. What fancy, high status people do and partake in and consume. And so, examples of high culture would be things like Broadway, being a wine connoisseur, having knowledge of fine wine, enjoying classical music, going to the opera, museums. All of that would be considered high culture. Popular culture would be the entertainment, the culinary, the athletic tastes, the artifacts that are shared by the masses. So everything from summer blockbusters like the Avenger movies to, margaritas and beer, pop music, blue jeans, all of those, whatever, is coming on the TV on ABC, CBS, NBC, soap operas, that type of thing, reality TV, all of that's considered to be pop culture. And popular culture is held in less esteem than high culture. So, high culture, of course, is associated with people of a certain status, and pop culture is kind of associated with everyone in a society. And the assumption that everyone in society can access pop culture is made possible through, of course, the development of mass media. Mass media is a medium of public communication that's intended to reach and influence a mass audience. So from the earliest, newspapers until, what we have today, we have cable TV, we have, radio stations, we have websites on the internet. We have, movies that are playing at movie theaters as well as just being streamed on streaming services and being downloaded in that fashion. All of that's considered mass media, and this is part of how we easily share our culture. Mass media is part of what's made cultural diffusion and thus cultural leveling so much more prominent in the last, the last 10 years than in any other time period in history. Now, before I leave media behind, it's worth noting that what has also contributed to the growing rate of cultural diffusion and cultural leveling, of course, is social media. Because even in mass media, although the goal is for it to be disseminated to the masses, there are still elite gatekeepers with status who make decisions about what song is played on the radio, what TV shows are going to get picked up for fall TV premieres, what movies are going to get widely released, what types of products are we going to put in these department stores or supermarkets, right? There is still someone who is not me or you making those decisions in the world of mass media. But in social media, who is making decisions about, the content that they share and put out there? Well, that's everyday people. So social media is kind of genius in the sense that in a lot of ways, it does away with gatekeepers, right? So if you are a musician and you can't get anyone to pick you up as an artist and help you cut an album and then send it to radio stations, you're not getting any radio play, then that maybe would have been the end of your career 20, 30 years ago. Of course, now, provided you have the money to get some studio time, you can produce the music yourself. You can put it up on your YouTube channel, or you make a Spotify station, SoundCloud, and it can be shared and disseminated that way. So social media is contributing even further to that rapid cultural diffusion that we are seeing at this point in time. So that's it for kind of all of our, kind of types of culture, elements of culture terms. I am now in this presentation going to turn to answering the question, do we all share the same culture? Because I've been speaking about how societies have a common culture, that is a key criteria of a society, is that we have a common culture, which suggests that we all share in it. And to a certain extent we do, or certainly we're at least all aware of the common culture. But that doesn't mean that we all partake and consume it and believe in it in the same way. So I'm going to introduce a handful of new terms here that you see in red on the slide. So, first of all, when we talk about common culture, the question to ask is, who kind of is in control? Who are the gatekeepers that control the creation of our shared culture? Because not all of us have the same power to create things in our culture. And the people in power that that are most responsible for the creation, construction of this common culture, we call this the dominant ideology. Like, this is the main kind of way of thinking and feeling and believing and doing in society, and it reflects the interests usually of the dominant class. Now, this isn't necessarily as controversial or problematic in a monocultural society. In a monocultural society, for the most part, society is made up largely of one type of person. They have a largely shared ethnicity, shared language, shared racial backgrounds, shared religious backgrounds, right? They have pretty much all of their identity markers are the same. They're identical. And so we call that type of society monocultural. Now, if you have a society where you have people of different races, different ethnicities, different languages and religions, right? We call that type of society multicultural or pluralistic. And it is, while multiculturalism can be a strength, can be an asset, can be an advantage. It makes for all types of delicious foods and, amazingly, innovative music. And there are a lot of opportunities that exist when you have a lot of different people that share a society. But multiculturalism can also be a source of conflict, or what we call culture wars, because it does increase the likelihood that there will be tension between groups as they try to wrestle for control over the dominant ideology. That a society where there is multicultural groups may not necessarily agree on what the dominant ideology should be, and what the kind of primary cultural components in terms of values, norms, and beliefs should be. So if you've ever heard that concept, culture wars, not that culture wars never occur in monocultural societies, but they are certainly much more common in a multicultural society. And America has been the source of several during our history. Now, another way in which you can have multiple cultures that exist within a society can be best depicted or explained through the concept of subcultures. Subcultures are smaller groups within a larger society that, while they do share the common culture, they also have some cultural elements that are uniquely their own, that mark them as being a member of this subgroup within society. So the next handful of slides get at that. Like, what does it mean to be part of a subculture? So, subcultures provide their members with distinctive values and ways of viewing the world, values that might be different from the larger values. And so, your book mentions, of course, the bodybuilding subculture world. In what ways are their norms and values and beliefs perhaps distinct from a person that's not part of that society? They're focused on appearance, the amount of time in the gym, the very regimented way of eating, perhaps the belief in supplements and vitamins, the acceptance of partaking in supplements and vitamins. All of those might be values, beliefs, norms that set the bodybuilding group apart as a subculture, which doesn't necessarily mean that they don't like Hamilton or Avenger movies or they don't wear blue jeans or they don't watch football on Sundays, right? Because they still share components with the larger common culture as well, but they do have some elements that are distinct to themselves. Another example raised by your book is ballroom dancers. Once again, they know how to evaluate dance moves and presentations. They have special language to communicate with one another. A lot of subgroups often do have their own slang or their own kind of linguistic variations as a way to once again mark themselves as being part of a subgroup distinct from the larger group. So, truck drivers would be another example of a subgroup that has its own norms, values, and lingo. But then your book makes the point, because truck drivers are oftentimes overwhelmingly white men, that if you are a non-white truck driver or if you are a woman truck driver, you are then part of a even smaller subculture within that subculture. So once again, you might want to think about this as like those nesting dolls, a small, tiny doll inside a small doll inside of a slightly larger doll inside of a large doll, right? That subcultures can be nestled or nested within one another. And so, what motivates a person to be part of a subculture? In a way, right, it's a way to express your own unique interests and to find other people that share those interests, and then to show solidarity with those people that share that interest, which is this example you see of a woman who I think is dressed up as some type of comic book character. Comic Cons have become extremely popular in the last decade or so. But thinking about, especially in a very large society, it may not make you feel unique or special to take part of the common culture because so many people are doing and taking part of that. But if you find yourself passionate about a subgroup, then taking part in that subculture offers you like a unique little niche, a little place in the world and society. And people do need that. That is an identity need, something that people need in order to feel special, unique, accepted. But in some cases, if you are part of a subculture where your values, your norms, and your beliefs all run counter to the larger culture's norms, values, and beliefs, then we call that type of subculture a counterculture. And it's worth noting that most subcultures, gangs, motorcycle gangs, cowboys, truck drivers, they are not countercultures. Even ones that engage in illegal activity usually still have a lot of values in common with larger society, even if their norms are different or how they express those values are different. But there are examples of countercultures. Obviously, the most popular example, historical example, is what we call the counterculture movement, or what's more commonly known as hippies, right? So during the 60s and the 70s, right, if you were part of the counterculture movement, you were a hippie, then what you believed in, freedom, free love, peace, partaking in drugs, rejecting monogamy. If you were a man, growing your hair out long. If you were a woman, wearing jeans and pants at a time when a lot of women weren't wearing pants as of yet. All of those things literally represented a rejection of mainstream dominant ideology culture. Um, Historical examples, if you were part of the anti-slavery movement in the South during the time period in which they had slavery, clearly you were part of a counterculture because what you were engaging in was literally in opposition to what the rest of society in your part of the country believed in and accepted. In today's world, you could make the argument, right, that for most people, the idea of, or racial hierarchy or hate or bigotry, flies into the face of what we say about ourselves as Americans who are accepting of, diversity and tolerance, and that we believe those things are a strength. So if you are part of like a supremacist organization, then that would be an example of a counterculture. So that is it for this fourth presentation. There is one final part, part five, and that one will have us discussing or focusing on how do we understand, evaluate, make sense of cultures that are not our own.